Hello, I'm here today with Peter Oliver, and I've recently published a story by Peter about his own life experiences in dealing with, mental health issues, which is for many people a very common reality. And in relation, of course, to this recent bill that's been introduced in Parliament, which is a private member's bill, Bill C-218, which would eliminate that option of euthanasia for mental illness alone in our country of Canada. So I should give you a bit of background, and then I'll go to Peter, and we can discuss this a tiny bit. But I think he will also tell his story, which would be fabulous. Anyway, the point of it is that in 2021, when Canada expanded its MAID law, its euthanasia law, by Bill C-7, it did so by doing several things. One of the things it did is it eliminated that you had to have a terminal condition. It eliminated the requirement that that their natural death be reasonably foreseeable. The second thing it did is it eliminated the 10-day waiting period for people who were terminally ill or that they were deemed that their natural death was reasonably foreseeable. Another thing it did is it created within that then a two-tier law. It said, or two-track law, it said that if you are deemed that your natural death is reasonably foreseeable, you would have no waiting period. As I said, that 10-day waiting period was eliminated. But if you are deemed that you are not terminally ill, meaning that your natural death is not reasonably foreseeable, but you have chronic conditions or that you have an irremediable health condition, that you would have a 90-day waiting period. It did a few other things, but one of the big things it also did is it allowed euthanasia for what we would say mental illness alone or mental health alone, and under the concept that that person has an irremediable condition. Okay. Now that was at first then placed with a 2-year moratorium on it, because that was I'm saying in March of 2021 that was passed in our laws, but the government said we'll put a 2-year moratorium on that because we don't yet have rules or sort of protocols around that. And then then they examined that, and then there was a bit of pressure on the government, so they decided to delay it till 2024, and then again they delayed it now until March of 2027. So the information that's important here is that as of this moment, the Canadian government will allow MAID euthanasia for mental illness alone starting in March of 2027. The exact date is actually March 17th of 2027. And there was a bill in the previous Parliament that was introduced by a member of Parliament to prevent that from going into place, and that bill was defeated. So now in this current Parliament, we have another bill dealing with this whole question again, and that is a bill that once again looks at this question and is saying it's identical wording. It would simply then not permit euthanasia for mental illness alone. And there's very good reasons for this. Now, as you know, I'm Alex Schadenberg. I'm running the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. I'm opposed to all euthanasia, and assisted suicide is quite clear. In fact, my little saying is I oppose killing people. Nonetheless, extending this to people with mental illness alone would have significant realities to it. And so this is why Peter wrote his story, and I think that that's quite important. So Peter, thank you for joining me. I think this is a good opportunity to talk about the real life experience of someone and how this concept of euthanasia for mental illness alone might affect somebody going through similar conditions that you've been experiencing. So please introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm offer a few thoughts on my own background in the article, but I work as the executive director for the Catholic Health Association of Saskatchewan. I have been in various forms of ministry throughout the course of my life, beginning with parish ministry and then working in corrections as a chaplain, and more recently in the area of health. Our association represents numbers of members within the province of Saskatchewan. Some of those are institutional members, about 16 healthcare facilities, as well as about 150 associate members who belong to organizations like the Knights of Columbus and Catholic Women's League and parishes, as well as a number of private members. So that's the nature of our association. priorities for our work are really to support a mission response to healthcare that is holistic, that is in a very real sense a response to a calling of what the church calls us to and the healing ministry of Jesus Christ. And within that context, the subjects of mental health and a response to assisted suicide have been priorities. So
Yes.
yeah, so that's a little bit of an idea.
Now, I should ask you a question because you're talking about the Saskatchewan Catholic Health Association, and I'm assuming that within that organization, some of your healthcare facilities would have, would you say, parts of them that are involved with directly with mental health.
So I would sort of respond to that in a variety of ways. There's no direct mental health work being done by the Catholic facilities in the province. There is addictions response,
Okay.
very progressive addictions response. But also, I don't think that you can ever talk about working with people who are struggling with healthcare issues of any kind. For instance, let's consider the renal unit at St. Paul's Hospital, where people struggle with the need for dialysis for years on end.
That's right.
Well, I mean, regular access to dialysis is a tremendous mental health challenge. It's not simply a physical health challenge. So, of course, mental health pervades everything. But in the broader context, our work with mental health is also connected with parishes and dioceses who have made significant steps in the last few years toward building support systems in response to mental health. And so that's also very much a part of what we're about.
No, that's very, very good. I only asked the question because I know that there's quite a few Catholic health facilities that have a specialty, like a floor or a specialty in mental health itself. For instance, here in London, Ontario, the psychiatric specific unit is run by Catholic Healthcare. So.
Right. Yeah. For sure.
So actually, this issue of Bill C-218, I know you've been involved in these issues, especially with your work in general. But I mean, the fact of it is that your whole story talks about how this affects you personally. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Well, I think in the article I describe an experience of depression, which has been for me chronic. It has been, and by chronic I mean that there's no reasonable expectation that I will not struggle with depression for the remaining part of my life. That's a reality, and it's debilitating some of the time. And I've had significant amounts of support from counselors and psychiatry at one point, and a really great plan of care, which involves exercise and taking care of my mental health by a good social encounter and
Yep.
all the things that you can do. I guess maybe what's not in the article, one thing I could speak to would be, so over COVID, I found myself in a situation where we're not able to work, so we were being supported basically throughout the course of COVID. So we had ample amount of time, and I simply, and even within the support of the counselor that I was working with, I said, I am going to do everything I can to deal with this struggle with depression. I'm going to use this time. And I got in great physical shape, and I was doing all the things you could possibly do with all the tools at my disposal. And I did not succeed in turning the corner, and to a point where I would say, I was not depressed. It was great. I was in great shape, like it was just fantastic, cycling every day and that kind of thing. But no, it never went away.
But Peter, I think that, and I don't think we should get into the COVID discussion, but I think the problem with COVID also is that we really need interaction in a big way with others. And I know you have family, so you would have still had, but I mean, COVID did discourage our interaction so much that that would have also been a difficulty for somebody going through these issues that you've been going through.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a heavy time, right, with a lot of
Yeah,
different things that were happening. But honest to goodness, for me, the experience of COVID was one of the best years of our life. You know,
yeah.
we just had time to do things that we didn't have time to do otherwise. But in terms of the condition that I'm struggling with, that was not, it didn't resolve the problem. So, um, one thing that prompted the article that might speak to people is, I purely by accident came across a PBS YouTube about, I believe the situation was in Belgium, where a young woman is accessing assisted suicide. And so I'm not using the legal term here as described by the government of Canada, where assisted suicide is basically you ingest a poisonous medication to end your life, but more generally as a term for all of what MAID describes. But at any rate, what happened was, I think 34 years old, she's struggling with depression, and they filmed her having her life ended.
Yes.
Absolutely just overwhelmed with shock, just watching this and just thinking, good heavens, like moments before they're having a little chat and just talking about how things are going, that kind of thing. And then the next thing you know, you have a doctor and they're very cavalier filming this person in their home, and there's someone's weeping in the background, and the individual is dead. I'm like, this is where we think we're going.
Yeah, and it's an otherwise healthy person. I know the story that you're talking about. I know the film clip and everything about it. And in fact, it's one of the reasons I always say to people when they have a family member who's considering death by MAID, I tell them don't be in the room because you don't want the person to die alone, but at the same time, you will be carrying that with you whether you like it or not, because it is a death. It is causing of death. This person is being killed.
Yes.
You just call it what you want. That's what is happening.
Yeah.
So
And it's just so I mean, what I kind of end the article with is what am I looking for from our leadership, our country, what culture do we want to nurture and support? And as a person who's struggling with this kind of health issue, I'm looking for, a person who rallies behind me, supports me, conveys to me convictions that suggest that no, you can do it. You can manage. You can cope. You can get through this. Not
yeah,
the message that, well, maybe you can't, and so we'll end your life. Like, I mean, even in saying it, it's just so simply overwhelming. Like,
yes. What I really appreciate about your story is how honest you were about it. But on top of it, most people would look at you, Peter, and say, Peter, yeah, you've gone through depression, but you look pretty good, You look pretty good. So this doesn't really apply to you. But in your story, you explain it properly. You have been going through this chronic depression for many years, and therefore, sadly, you would technically qualify if this were allowed.
oh, there's no question at all. I could make a stellar case for assisted suicide. There, 40 years of chronic depression, and having attempted every possible means of counteracting it. I mean, if you want to talk about an irredeemable condition, if you want to talk about making a case for not wanting to carry on, I mean, I could put everything together very easily, and
Yes.
it would be not that difficult to find a MAID provider who could provide me with that kind of service. There's just, I mean, I don't think that people really grasp that aspect, that in a certain respect, it is not that hard to access assisted suicide. It's much easier to access assisted suicide than it is to access help. And physically, whether you're elderly or whether you're disabled, and in this case, as we move towards mental health conditions, it's not that hard to access it. And a person like myself wouldn't have, I would have all the pieces to be able to make that argument.
Yeah, and sadly I agree, because obviously I've watched all the data. I can see what's happening and the numbers, and I also know that people who need special help and needs, that they have a very difficult time achieving that, especially if you have certain disabilities that have a specific nature to it. And it's not that Canadians are such a terrible people or the country's such a terrible country. It's not that at all. It's just that there's a sort of a reality of a limited amount of care, especially in certain circumstances. And MAID, well, we offer that pretty quickly, and we approve it pretty quickly. Now, I should explain something to the listeners, and Peter can interject afterwards, how this would probably be done, because remember, it's not been instituted yet in Canada. So we're dealing with what the law says and how it would. So they would probably deal with it under this concept of the 90-day waiting period, because they would say that you do not have a terminal, or how would you say, your natural death is not reasonably foreseeable. Now, I put a caveat to that, because if someone's attempted suicide on multiple occasions, the question would then become, is their natural death actually reasonably foreseeable or not? You know what I'm getting to? Like, there would be some interpretation that this person might attempt suicide again, which means that could be interpreted to mean that their natural death is reasonably foreseeable. Nonetheless, technically speaking, you would not, and many people would not have a physical condition to cause their death. So they'd have that 90-day waiting period in the same way as people with chronic conditions such as significant disabilities are being approved right now for MAID, for euthanasia, based on that 90-day waiting period, where the doctor says, no, your natural death is not reasonably foreseeable, but you have an irremediable medical condition and you claim to be suffering. And I'm assuming it would be the same thing here, that they would approve most of these people based on a 90-day waiting period. And that means, yeah, in 90 days, they would be dead then.
Yeah, and I don't find that in the slightest bit encouraging
No,
because
I'm not trying to encourage you. I'm just trying to explain to the people exactly how
no, I
it
mean
probably would work.
it's not really like a cautionary thing or whatever. It's like 90 days. Okay, so our summer, which we just love in Saskatchewan, is about 90 days long, and it flies by like it's gone in no time at all. And so, I mean, 90 days compared to 40 years of depression, that's nothing. Okay,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, whatever. I If I were holding out for for someone to end my life, that's I get the idea that I don't want someone walking into a clinic who's suicidal today and then having their life ended. Um, but I mean, it's just not. There's just not. That's not a review. I mean, in the best possible world, not that's not the best possible world, but in a less crazy world, a review by some judicial authority and so forth, and that kind of thing, and a requirement that you have had to do, or that you're exploring the options. And you're trying things, which in my case wouldn't be anything, like I just nothing tried. But I mean, those might be in, but I just it's just hard to put one's mind around the direction. And to me, this is really the issue with MAID. It's the question
Yes.
of the direction. Where are we going as a culture, as a community? How are we responding? And really, I'm absolutely convinced you can't give two messages. You can't sort of say, well, we'll do this or we'll do that. Either you're for me, it'd be like a coach working for, for a stellar hockey team that says, well, of course we could lose. It's like, no, you can't give that message. That's not the message. That's not your responsibility to give that.
That's right.
No, the opposite team's responsibility. So
Yeah, I agree. You can't have a culture that both promotes suicide prevention and suicide acceptance all at the same time and have it make any sense whatsoever. But right off the bat, as you know, I'm obviously, you see the name, Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Now, why do I oppose killing people? It's not just for psychiatric. I think it's always wrong to get involved with killing people. And whether we're talking about mental health issues or we're talking about someone with a significant health condition, I do believe it is the role of culture and the society and each of us to properly care for the other person. Because as a human being, I recognize that one of the most difficult things is to go through a health condition and to do so without the support of their friends, community, etc. And in fact, this is the challenge, I believe, to the culture is how do we care for the other, not how do we kill the other. And this is the challenge. But obviously, Canada seems to be going the other direction. It's our hope that they at least turn the direction on this mental illness issue to have made for mental illness. That it's just, to me, it's everything's going beyond ridiculous. Not to say that killing people in the first place isn't ridiculous.
yeah, and maybe one element of it that I think also deserves attention, because in talking about having struggled with depression for these many years, I think it's important to recognize that that struggle was not without gifts.
Right.
And although hard, of course, yes, but profound, profound connections with other people, profound, personal discoveries about how how your mental health works and that kind of thing. Meaningfulness. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to discover, in the midst of those struggles, the sort of the wonder of, yeah, I don't know that I would do the exercise that I do. I don't know that I would go on the long walks and enjoy nature the way I do if it were not for this. But I'm required to do it. If I don't do it, then it's going to be a bad day.
Right.
So, okay, so go do it. Oh, well, then it turns out actually this is a beautiful day. This is beautiful nature. Just did this morning. I was out walking. I was like, okay, this is really wonderful. So I mean, of course, all suffering is, who wants to suffer? Nobody. But we need to understand that suffering has there are gifts within that, and we need to be able to walk with people and help them to sort of navigate that.
Yep, and I agree with you. Life is beautiful, and even in the darkest times, when we look at the good around us, it is phenomenal. I would actually encourage you to write about that, Peter. You're obviously an excellent writer. There's no question about it. You have a talent, but and you've expressed things incredibly well. But there is importance because so many people going through the same type of a difficulty where they've had long-term chronic depression. We were interviewing a woman who's in her 80s, and she's talking about how happy she is to be alive, and it's but she went through so long her depression and the difficulties, and she talks about how it's just so wonderful now that she has these. She's an aunt, so she has these. Her relatives have kids, and she finds so much joy in that. And she says, if I had been dead, I would have missed all this joy, and
Mhm.
I'm just so happy I have this, even though I've gone through incredible struggles.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so yeah, there's struggles, but there is beauty and joy in life and just living. And I think that's a phenomenal message. And sometimes we don't want to see that because we're so deep into it. It becomes difficult. You would know it better than me. I'm more of this up personality, so
Yeah.
I upset people sometimes with that. But anyway,
No, I mean, but that's true, right? And what you're saying is so true, is that at times, if you're in a really deep struggle, you
yeah,
need other people around you that can believe almost for you.
yeah,
That's critical. And and so and that but that creates a whole community and so forth. So I mean, in putting forward the thoughts that I put forward, I resist judgment and recognize that people are struggling a great deal in life, and I think there can be a tendency within the context of trying to move forward with uh, helping to build a culture of life, if you like, that you could be dismissive. You say, "Wow,
Right.
anybody can do." No, that's not true. No, people really, they are some
Yes.
in real peril. All the more reason that they need to be surrounded by people of hope, people who are really, they are grounded and can provide the kind of supports that that offer that, not a message, as has been this case in so many of the stories that have kind of come out in the post-made world, where an individual's in a hospital setting and they're struggling, maybe elderly, and someone comes along and says, "Well, we could end this for you." And then they just go into a terrible depression because someone has essentially messaged to them that we don't see any meaning in what you're doing, and we could end your life. Like that, it's so cruel almost.
I agree. I agree completely. So, I'm really happy we've had this conversation because, you see, I've known you, but I didn't know all about you and your life experiences. And, you never know about everybody that you may have talked to before and things like that. You simply don't know what they're going through. And I don't live your experiences. So that's why it was so impressive and important that you shared those with people. But we don't want this law to expand to people with mental illness. And the crazy thing is that even though I'm opposed to euthanasia completely, this whole concept is like bizarre because it doesn't even fit the original concept that was sold to Canadians, which was it would be competent adults who are freely choosing and capable of consenting. Well, the problem with mental health issues is the question of competency is questionable. Uh, you may seem competent, but are you really competent? Are you freely consenting? Are you, all these things start really getting into a mess, and they're saying, but these people are suffering. Well, I recognize that people are suffering, and I don't want people to suffer, and I want to be there and make sure people are there to care for people so that to help them through their difficult times. But I can never see any good about killing someone. I just can't see it.
I guess I mean, and even you've touched on the issue of freedom and the current realities are rather perplexing in that regard, where someone can be diagnosed with a terminal condition, and be looking at some very difficult days ahead, and then within 24 hours they can be dead. Well, how much
Right.
freedom did you have in the midst of that, of receiving that news, to be able to make an informed judgment, a thought out, discerned judgment about
Right.
that? Like that doesn't sound like freedom to me.
No, and actually, anyway, we can get into the philosophical issues
Sure.
at another time. But
Sure.
I'm really thankful, and I'm hoping that many people share this. And the whole point is that for others who are going through similar conditions, similar situations, obviously everybody's different, and everyone's life experience is different. To also recognize that we encourage you to speak out, and you can make a difference in this world by speaking out about your situation because you're not alone. And I know this is the difficulty here. A lot of people, when they get into a dark time, they feel they're alone, and that's normal, but they're not alone, and that we do care and others care, but that needs to be really encouraged. But this concept of euthanasia for mental illness is not about care, it's about abandonment.
Hmm.
And it comes down to killing the person in need. So I'm hoping that others come forward with their stories and start sharing more about it. And in turn, that should convince some members of parliament that maybe this is the wrong direction. And I'm hoping that's what happens. I'm quite hopeful that that Canada will turn the corner on this, and and I'm glad I have hope because sometimes that's difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
And thank you, Peter.
You're welcome. I'm pleased to offer a few thoughts on it.
Excellent.